Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session on devolution in England, metro mayors, and food system transformation. My name is Sofia Parent. I'm head of local action at Sustain. And I'm here supported by my colleague Vera Zakharov. She's local action coordinator. Hello, you can see her waving on the screen now. And it's our pleasure to welcome everyone to this session. So as you've noticed, the session is being recorded. The recording will be made available online alongside with some of the presentations you're going to see on your screens today. So that will all be published on our events pages. So Sustain endeavors to run inclusive events. So we'd like everyone to feel that this is a safe space to treat each other with respect as equals. So let's respect each other's perspectives and expertise, including during questions, Q&A, but please let us know if there's anything we can do to improve that. So the session is about devolution, metro mayors, and opportunities for food systems transformations. And we decided to do this session on the back of the local elections this year, which have seen several mayoral candidates across the political spectrum making commitments that on food-related issues, from replicating the experience of London on their Transport for London network to introduce healthier advertising policies across transport networks, to commitments on school meals for all, to addressing food insecurity among communities. And we've also seen that among the manifestos of main political parties in the run-up to the general election, there's commitments to continuing the pace of devolution. So we think this session is really timely for everyone that works to transform food systems, to see where opportunities lie, not just now, but in the future. So this is very briefly setting the scenes, but what I would like to do next is to pass on to the experts and those with experiences. So we're first going to hear from Christopher Yap. Is from City University. He's going to give us a brief overview of the history of devolution, but also some of the prospects and opportunities. And then we're going to hear an inside view from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and Elaine Morgan is here to talk us through a little bit about that. And then we're going to have three well-established food partnerships from West Yorkshire. So Leeds, Calderdale, and Bradford, and from their coordinators, who are going to give us an overview of they're quite established in terms of their local work, but there's a desire to work at a regional level. So they're going to give us a bit of a perspective of what's been going on. So we hope this is really useful for everyone that wants to engage at this level. And we'll have 20 minutes at the end for questions, but also to invite you to share your experience in this area. So we hope it's going to be a really interesting session for everyone. And without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Chris Yap, who's going to share his screen and give us a brief history, but also looking towards the future and opportunities. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Sophia. I'm just going to share my screen. And you can see that?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Brilliant. So thank you very much for having me. My name's Chris Yap. I'm a research fellow at the Centre for Food Policy. I'm also connected to the Fix Our Food research programme, which some of you may have come across. And I've been asked to speak for 15 minutes or so on the past and future of English devolution. So where have we come from, and why does that matter now? So there's a lot of detail on this slide, and I'm not going to go into all of it. But what's more important than the detail in each of these boxes is the overall picture, the overall story that comes out. So I include here, just in the top left, the fact that in 1986, the Metropolitan County Councils and the Greater London Council, the GLC, were abolished. And this marked the end of quite a long period of regionalism in the UK that had gone on for much of the 20th century. And it's significant that between 1986 and essentially 1997, we really didn't have any devolution in this country. So what I would consider the current epoch of devolved government really begins in 1997. So one of the first things that Tony Blair did when he came to power was not only to, was first to concentrate on devolution to Scotland, to Wales, and to Northern Ireland, but was also to sign the Regional Development Agencies Act. And this allowed for the creation of regional development agencies, regional development corporations in England with responsibility over regional economic growth. But in England, the discourse, the policy discourse around regionalism really took off around 2000. John Prescott was a real driver of this. Labour committed to elected regional assemblies across the UK, and this there was a lot of energy and a lot of political capital put into this policy, and it ended quite abruptly with the North East referendum when they rejected an elected regional assembly. And there's quite an interesting story about how that campaign was run and what came out of that referendum. But this meant a pivot for Labour. So they swiftly left behind this policy of elected regional assemblies and really lent into regional development agencies, which were accompanied by what they called government offices for the regions. So you had these two bodies working in parallel across the 9 regions of the UK, receiving money from central government. This all changed. So these dotted lines here, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but these dotted lines represent sort of significant changes of government. So this is the coalition government coming in 2010, Cameron and Clegg. And in order to save money, essentially to reduce public spending, they abolished the regional development agencies and government offices for the regions. And these were replaced with a network of LEPs, local enterprise partnerships, which we're still living with today. And the crucial difference is that these are no longer centrally government funded after an initial startup grant, and these are voluntary partnerships between local authority organisations and the private sector. So they have a very similar mandate, but they're very differently constituted, and they have a very different budget. And LEPs are interesting. They do excellent work in some areas, but they're also problematic in lots of ways in that they don't fit neatly with jurisdictional boundaries. And this map is out of date. This is from 2013, but it shows quite clearly how these cross-hatched areas, these are local authorities that are covered by by 2 or more local enterprise partnerships. So there's already quite a messiness and an incoherence to these nested levels of governance. I skipped over these green boxes are some. There is more that we could put in here, but in order to make the slide manageable, these are some of the key pieces of legislation which have affected devolution over the last 20 years or so. This act in 2009 allowed for the establishment of combined authorities, and Manchester was the first to be established using this legislation in 2011. I believe that began in 2010, that process. Really, the period of devolution that we're talking about now, so mayoral combined authorities, combined county authorities, and combined authorities took off from 2014 onwards. And 2014 to 2016 was quite a significant period. The 2016 Act, Cities Local Government Devolution Act, established 2 things. The first was that combined authorities could have directly elected mayors, and these are incredibly important. We're going to come back to that. And it also established the devolution framework, which is what all of these mayoral combined authorities and combined authorities fit within. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And this has been adapted since then, but really we're still working with a version of this 2016 framework. The framework has been adapted in 2022, for example, to enable these non-metro-centric combined authority areas. So Lancashire, for example, was in discussion about this to emerge. And the last sort of significant development I wanted to draw attention to are the so-called trailblazer deals signed with the West Midlands and Greater Manchester in 2023, and a version of a trailblazer deal signed with the North East in 2024. And these allow, for the first time, multi-year financial settlements between these regional governments and national government. So this is for the first time in a long time that there is a degree of long-term financial and strategic planning is possible at that regional level, moving beyond grant funding and loan funding, which is something that local authorities, American one authorities, had been encouraged previously to seek out. And what this kind of reveals is that overall, the idea of regional governance hasn't really gone away. And the last 20 to 30 years has been a continuous reimagining of what that looks like. So nothing that's happening now is happening in a vacuum, and really we're left with some of the vestiges. We're left with many of the vestiges of this legislation from 97 onwards, as well as some of these institutions. And you can see that most clearly in the coexistence of mayoral combined authorities and LEPs that have at best a slightly ill-defined relationship and overlapping mandate. For time. So mayoral combined authorities are essentially, they're a robust legal structure. There are many ways that counties and different authorities can collaborate, can work with one another, but actually this is the most secure form. It's something which can only be instigated by what are called upper tier levels of government. So this means, sorry, upper tier levels of governance. So this means county authorities and unitary authorities are the only ones that can initiate it. You can't get a herd of parish councils coming together to form an authority. So it has quite a clear place within the nested governance structure. They've been touted, particularly, and this is to quote the LGA, as a form of governance which is particularly sensitive to place. This is about administrative coherence, scale, and the importance of reflecting economic and transport geography. And that place-based nature is incredibly important. Crucially, each mayoral combined authority negotiates a bespoke deal with national government as to what their mandate will be, what their specific role will be. And the LGA has a helpful devolution register, which sets out all of these responsibilities, and particularly the wording and what's included and what's not, the type of deal, whether it's a partnership, whether it's a program. So I would say it's worth checking that out. All of these bespoke deals fit within a version of the devolution framework. So this is a framework of devolved powers ranging from the least, a level 1, to the most, a level 4. Level 1 and 2 describe combined authorities only. Level 3 requires a mayor. So levels 3 and 4 are mayoral combined authorities. We don't have any level 1s at all. Almost all mayoral combined authorities are level 3, which means in addition to those level 2 and level 1 responsibilities, they have a mayor, they have responsibilities over transport, urban regeneration, regional economic growth, and they can establish development corporations to influence local planning and development. And then we have a small number, including Manchester, which have these level 4 agreements, which includes responsibilities over skills, careers, local energy, place, housing, and regeneration. So there is a huge variation in terms of actually what's included in these bespoke deals, but they all fit in a way that, across these tiers. The current state, and you'll see a lot of lists around online, they're almost all out of date because this is happening right now. I believe, I've tried to make sure this is accurate, I believe we've got 12 currently on the books, but we also have a further 4 mayoral combined authorities that are agreed, the legislation is passed and will be enacted before the end of 2025. This could change within a few weeks' time, but I believe this is the current state. We also have 3 non-mayoral, so non-urban centric, non-metro centric combined authority deals that have been agreed, which is Lancashire, Devon, and Cornwall. And what's interesting is there's also a large number that are at this earlier stage. So they're not agreed, but the conversations are happening. And I think that's where there's a bit of an opportunity. In terms of what this looks like, you can see there, it's a significant part of England is covered now by mayoral combined authorities and combined authorities. So 48% of England's population is currently governed by a mayoral combined authority and 26% of its land area. I think these statistics are slightly out of date, but I think the narrative is still true. If all the deals I've mentioned on this previous slide, by the end of 2025, if all of these have gone through as planned, then 64% of England's population will live within a mayoral combined authority, 67% of its economic output, and 54% of its land area. This is now an incredibly consequential level of governance for all aspects of life, not least food systems. And it's happened very, very quickly. Now, mayors, I hope we can come more onto this, and I think this will come out through the discussion, but are incredibly important. They have an enormous political capital in that they have a local political mandate, which allows them not only to deliver on those things in the devolution deals, but to push that remit. And there are very good examples, and I think Manchester's been a real trailblazer here, where mayors have used their political capital to achieve things which can't be done by local or national government alone. And this aligns the UK with European cities, which I think for far longer have enjoyed sort of powerful local mayors who have been able to deliver change. There's an interesting piece of work done, it was a while back now, so it's a little out of date, by the LGA in 2021 that identify 4 roles that mayors have taken on. So this was, I think there was only 9 mayors at the time, but they've identified these roles of disruptor, convener, leader, and advocate. And I think all mayors take on these different roles at different times and in different contexts. And I think it's worth thinking how we engage with them strategically and what the ask is, recognizing that they have different forms of agency in different rooms. In terms of the future of devolution, Sophia, can you tell me when I've got a couple of minutes left? I'm sorry, I'm not sure where I am for time. In terms of the future of devolution,
We have almost 5 minutes left.
almost 5 minutes, perfect. In terms of the future of devolution, so the Institute for Government has called and set out quite concrete proposals for how devolution could be extended to cover 85% of England by the end of next Parliament. So that's a 5-year window. In terms of government, that's a blink of an eye. That's an incredibly quick rate of change to really transform 85% of the governance, well, change another 35% of the governance of this country. The current government, and I think this was quite underreported, but I think is significant, in the white paper that preceded the Levelling Up Act, they made a commitment that every part of England that wants one will have a devolution deal with powers at or approaching the highest levels of devolution, so tier 3 or tier 4, by 2030. And this means that actually they're committing in policy, if not in law, because this is a white paper, not an act, that actually 100% of England could be covered by a mayoral or county combined authority. Now, Labour, I don't know if you've been following the debates, have been a little bit vague as to exactly what form this that devolution would take, but they have committed without much detail to a enhanced devolution framework. So these bullet points are taken from a report. It's not in the manifesto, it's in a report called Power and Partnerships, which was released earlier this year. They're committed to a new, clearer framework for English devolution. We don't know whether that's replacing the current framework or building on it, as has happened previously. Interestingly, they've talked about a presumption towards devolution, which gives authorities the right to request powers, as well as making it easier to become an authority, a combined or mayoral combined authority in the first place. And most interestingly, I think, in terms of the actual detail, is a statutory requirement, a commitment to a statutory requirement for all combined authorities to adopt local growth plans. And what's quite interesting is how is this going to fit with this existing institutional architecture of LEPs, mayoral combined authorities, and these other overlapping governance remits. Lastly, just a few sort of thoughts in terms of where food systems fit in and where sustain and sustainable food places and partners can fit into this. I think it's worth recognizing, building on examples like Manchester and London have been real leaders here. Progress can be made, led by mayors, to deliver specific food policy, building on that enormous political capital that they have to drive change. So there's been progress made on free school meals, for example, on food security and on healthy food advertising restrictions. And this is significant. This isn't included in those devolution deals, but this is something which can be achieved by mayors. The second is to look closely at those devolution frameworks and to think about where food fits. So I don't know about you, but when I see local energy, when I see net zero, when I see regional economic growth, I can see food across those things automatically. But the point is it's not there and it's not explicit. So we currently have only 2 mayoral combined authorities, which are the North East and the West of England, which have food explicitly in their devolution deals. This is a huge opportunity, and I think this is a work for advocacy organisations to try and draw out where food fits and how food systems can deliver on these multiple legal mandates that these authorities are going to have, that they have or are going to have. I've talked a lot enough about mayors, but I think they're incredibly important. And part of that is about linking what's happening in the UK to what's happening internationally. So there is a vast network of well-established organisations, just examples here, C40 Cities, ICLE, which is the Institute for Local Government, and United Cities Local Government, UCLG, which are working to build capacity and network at the subnational level. And mayors have been incredibly consequential in all of these organisations, but there's a really emerging tier of translocal learning, and I want England to be part of that international discourse. But there's much we can learn, there's also much that we can give in terms of how change happens. And then the last point, thinking, I suppose, strategically, there is this window of opportunity to try as far as anyone is able, to influence how these bespoke deals are created, the wording of them, what specific mandates are, and these will be conversations which, if you're not already covered by Mayoral Combined Authority, are probably happening, even if it's unlikely that that a Mayoral Combined Authority will be sort of applied for soon. Actually, people are considering this at all levels of government, given the commitment to devolution from both parties and at all levels. But there's also a window of opportunity afterwards. As soon as those Mayoral Combined Authorities are established, there's a couple of years where these organisations aren't created in a vacuum. This is staff and institutions which are being moved and moulded from elsewhere. And actually, people are working out, how does this new office now work with these existing offices? How do we communicate with schools and these other teams, and with sustainable food places and local food partnerships and all these sorts of things? So there is a window before the dust settles, when these new institutions are set up, to really have an influence, I think, on the direction and on the ways of working. I'm probably at time now, so thank you very much for listening. If you want to, I would say it's worth looking at the Fix Our Food website, also the MSc in Food Policy, if you're interested in learning more about devolution. It's something that we talk about a lot, both in research and teaching. And lastly, there's a few references that I've sort of cited here. I was just talking to Sophia previously, that there is an enormous academic discourse around regionalism and also regional food systems, which I think is highly relevant to this debate. I've quite deliberately avoided any of that today, but I'm happy to talk about that in questions or in another session. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was really inspiring and hopeful. And I think this will be one of the sentences for the day, for me at least. There's a window of opportunity before the dust settles. So I hope this inspires everyone to look at this agenda. We'll have time for questions, thoughts at the end. So I would like to get us straight through to the next presentation by Elaine Morgan from Greater Manchester Combined Authority, who's going to give us an inside view of what's happening on some of the work that from the Combined Authority. Elaine, on to you.
Oh, thank you, Sophia. Hello, everyone. My name's Elaine Morgan, and I work for the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. I think just quickly before I go through my presentation, I think what's important to note is that the Combined Authority covers the whole of Greater Manchester, which is sort of ourselves and 10 local authorities. And probably up until 2021, the actual Combined Authority didn't have anyone leading on anything regarding food. There was nothing in the Greater Manchester strategy. So I'll just talk you through really the power of the Mayor and how this has obviously gained some momentum. So obviously during the pandemic, a lot of issues around holiday hunger. Obviously children weren't attending school, and then those that were entitled to free school meals weren't getting a hot meal either. We also had people who were struggling financially because they were furloughed, and there was, you know, up and down the country there was some great kind of movements established around supporting this agenda, and I think what's interesting to note then was that in 2021 Andy Burnham actually then had some food commitments within his mayoral manifesto for his sort of re-election campaign for his second term, which, you know, was unheard of, I think, elsewhere in the country. So these are just a list of what was in his manifesto. And obviously you can see that the first one there is to work to end the scandal of food poverty. And then the second one was around developing that No Child Should Go Hungry campaign to end holiday hunger. So we can see that the issues that he was, sort of really promoting at the time were around food insecurity, and that was as a result of the pandemic. So we were then asked on his re-election that we would like to do a focus on food security in Greater Manchester, and this was based when he first came into power in 2017. One of his key objectives was to end the need for rough sleeping in Greater Manchester, and he established a homeless action network because he recognised there was so much activity going on within this particular about this particular issue, but actually it wasn't coordinated, there was duplication, there was gaps. So we asked for this Homeless Action Network to come together, which was a mix of cross-sector partners to look at how they could address it in a collaborative way. So following his re-election, I was asked if we could look at establishing a food security action network. And the reason why we focused on food security was that we recognise the food system is so big. So you have you have climate and environment, you have the biodiversity side, then you've got issues around crops and livestock, your processing, markets and trade, you've got the health side, you've got loss, waste, and then obviously then you've got the food security. And we just felt that it was complex, it was complicated, and to start off with, the focus would be food security, mainly because, again, the pandemic, and also then we very quickly shift into the cost of living crisis. So when we were establishing the Food Security Action Network, we took a mission-orientated approach. I don't know if some of you have seen the work that's been done with, I think it's with UCL, Camden with Mariana Mazzucata, just about mission-orientated approaches. And we just felt that this was a way that we could maybe start to achieve something. So you have an overarching challenge that sometimes seems a little bit unsurmountable, and then you have a mission to help you to support to get to that challenge. And then what happens is then you sort of chunk it down into sort of task force groups, which ideally emerge from sort of reinforcing a bottom-up approach, and also kind of a strong emphasis on a whole society approach as well, and making sure that they're realistically achievable. So in 2021, we used all our sort of networks that we had, not just in the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, but reaching out to RBC FSE sectors, public sector organisations and private businesses. And we developed a plan on a page. So the mission for us was to end food insecurity in Greater Manchester with initial focus on no child should go hungry. And that basically targeted Andy's first sort of top 2 mayoral manifesto commitments. And you can see some of the sectors there that we started to engage. I think sometimes what we found was there are sectors that initially you think weren't involved in food, but actually became more important as we started to undertake this piece of work. I would say digital was key to a lot of the work that we got involved with. And then we had an initial launch event in October 2021. And from that, we allowed the network members to decide on their 3 key objectives for the next 12 to 18 months. And this was the 3 that they chose at that period in time. And that was increasing the uptake of Healthy Start vouchers, because at the time there was 5 million going unclaimed in Greater Manchester. The other one was ending holiday hunger, which was a huge issue still coming out of the pandemic, cost of living crisis. And then the next one was doing more for those that miss out. So again, we found there was a real issue that there was lots of people who were just above that threshold of government support. And we also have quite a big population of refugees, asylum seekers as well in Greater Manchester, who had been struggling during the pandemic as well to get any kind of support. So we've done loads of work, and I can go through some of our outcomes. But what's interesting to note is the Mayor attends our quarterly Food Security Action Network meetings, and I think that provides a lot of accountability. It's a steer for us in terms of his sort of next steps, because he's always thinking about what the next ask might be, not just locally, regionally, but sometimes at a national level as well. And in November, he asked us to refresh our sort of mission and to have a look again at some of our sort of focused task force groups as well in terms of what we can achieve. So based on a number of issues that had come up in the last few years, especially one around, we do a Greater Manchester residents survey. And because of this piece of work that Andy is really passionate about, we've been able to include questions around food insecurity for the past 2 years. And it's been so interesting to see, the different cohorts that have been impacted, etc., as we've moved through the pandemic and the cost of living crisis. So actually our GM mission has changed to work to end food security in Greater Manchester, ensuring that no resident should have to end their day hungry. Because what we found from a lot of the surveys that we were undertaking was that actually, yes, families with children are massively impacted, but so are single male adults and people from Black and minority ethnic communities as well. So that's why we've changed the mission. We reviewed the sort of cross-sector collaboration, and actually we felt that who we had around the table was still relevant. We also, if I just mentioned as well, we do have representation from each of the 10 local authorities as well, and housing plays a big part in the work that we do. And again, we went out to network members, held a number of workshops, basically establishing a new set of focused task force groups. I think what's interesting about this is, so we've focused on increasing the uptake of Healthy Start, but also free school meals now, based on obviously a lot of concerns that we do have around children going to school hungry. And we're in the process of looking to develop an auto-enrolment process across the 10 local authorities, and where the CA add value is doing that kind of back office work for them, also developing DPIAs, looking at all the information sharing agreements, doing it once, and then allowing the 10 local authorities to lift and shift those processes, so it takes out some of that work for them. I think providing greater support to ensure that no child or young person goes hungry is another big key one for us, and not just in the holiday time, but through 365 days a year. So one of the biggest things that Andy has done is he launched an emergency food card initiative during the pandemic. Initially started out at £105 co-op cards to each local authority, where if a frontline worker came across a young person anywhere up until the age of 25 who might be presenting in food crisis, they could give them this particular card and they could go and get themselves a meal deal from the co-op. This is expanded now to we use the Hub platform. It offers out all the major supermarkets, and Andy committed following his recent re-election to provide £50,000 worth of these vouchers every year moving forward now from his mayoral budget, which is really helpful. And I know it's a crisis offer, but we are still seeing that people are in crisis across Greater Manchester. I think the other thing underpinning a lot of the work that we do is that recognition that actually food insecurity, the underlying root causes are poverty. So one of our task force groups now are helping those accessing emergency food to avoid or escape financial hardship. And that's where our pivot more in terms of our original approach to the cost of living crisis is now moving towards, is how do we support people to become more financially resilient in Greater Manchester. And then I think the fourth one, which is really interesting, is we've moved a lot more towards that kind of food sustainability as well. So that will be a real key for us moving forward, and probably links into what Chris, you were saying about those, although we don't have a devolution deal for food, in terms of being a level 4, there are some interesting opportunities, I think, in terms of planning regulations, looking at land for growing, etc., and also through the education work and skills side as well, in terms of trying to get people into this sector a little bit more and training them up. And this is just a quick
Elaine,
framework.
I'm giving you a 1-minute reminder.
Okay, thank you. So these are just some of our commitments, and I can share these slides, but I think one of the key things is that we are looking to now establish a GM food programme board that will be politically led, and also contain membership will include NHS GM, people from education, from environment, waste, etc. And again, it's about holding people to account in terms of the work that we're doing across Greater Manchester. These are some of our the progress so far. I think just worth mentioning about the role of the mayor as well is that influence on other local politicians as well. So we've had some great buy-in from our local MPs who've taken bills to Parliament around increasing auto-enrolment for Healthy Start, increasing the value, etc. But there's a list of some of the things that we've been involved with and some of the progress that we've made to date. And then just very quickly, there are so many action networks now in Greater Manchester that the mayor has asked us to establish what we call GM Networks Connect. So it's all the different action networks coming together to collaborate even more to see how we can support one another. So you can see there's a Digital Inclusion Action Network, GM Moving, Be Well, Live Well. You've got your poverty action groups, homeless action network. And again, this is proving really helpful, especially with connections to people that we've never had before, who can actually help us in terms of achieving our objectives from the task force group. And then those are the key themes for our GM Networks Connect. And again, like I said, I can share the slides, and that's actually membership representation at the moment of how that's all coming together. And again, we're starting to meet on a quarterly basis to support one another. But the Mayor has been absolutely pivotal in this, and giving us direction and really supporting. And I think the other thing I did mention to Sophia the other day, there was nothing in our Greater Manchester strategy at the Combined Authority around food. Going back maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but now there are some key aims and objectives that include food, so you can see the influence there that the Mayor's had from the outset. So it's been really refreshing to see. So that's it. Thanks, Sophia.
No, thank you, Elaine. This was really, really interesting. And yeah, you finished with the point that I wanted to highlight, actually, which is just because there wasn't anything in the strategy 5 years ago doesn't mean, well, just look at everything that is being championed by the Mayor now. Amazing work. And I hope this gives others in the call hope for their regions as well. So we're going straight through to our last presentation from West Yorkshire. So we have 3 food partnerships represented here from Leeds, Bradford and Calderdale. But I believe Sonia Woodcock from Leeds, you're going to give us a quick presentation, but then I welcome Ben Fletcher from Bradford and Anya Douglas from Calderdale to come in during the Q&A to add their thoughts as well. So I'll pass on to you now, Sonia. Thank you.
Great, thank you. These have been 2 really fantastic and interesting presentations to lead the way. And then hopefully this will sort of give you an understanding where we as 3 food partnerships coming together are interacting in this space. So Anya and I, so Calderdale and Leeds, we'd been talking for a long time about looking to work regionally. And actually in 2019, we met and had sort of a formal meeting about what this might look like and what we might be able to work on to maximize capacity and resource. A lot happened in the following year with COVID. And also by 2021, the first Mayor for West Yorkshire Combined Authority was elected. And so that sort of changed the landscape as well. Now, last autumn, the 3 of us found ourselves at the Northern Real Farming Conference that was held in Leeds. And we were involved in a procurement working group that was looking at a northern menu. And so, we're looking all the way from, Lancashire all the way over to East Yorkshire. And we just thought, really, West Yorkshire, come on, let's get together. We've got a mayor now. Let's see what we can do. So we agreed to meet. We then met in January, and we met as 5 representatives from the 5 food partnerships from West Yorkshire. We were looking for areas of common interest to progress at a regional level. So we had Bradford, Calderdale, and Leeds, who were significantly, as food partnerships, much further advanced than Kirklees and Wakefield. So we agreed we'd look for an opportunity to meet with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and we'd also consider our own links and connections and on how we might go about this. In March, I then had the opportunity to attend the Yorkshire and Humber Directors of Public Health event with a focus on health and climate. Tracy Brabin, who is the Mayor for the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, was the keynote speaker. So I saw this as a good opportunity. She gave her keynote speech focusing on economy and transport. It was blatant that food was not included, despite this being to the Directors of Public Health. So I took the opportunity when questions arose to see how could we get food on the agenda, and it really wasn't part of her thinking. At the same time, Ben also works. He works for the Bradford Council, so he took advantage of that, sent out a few emails, and one ended up on Jennifer Connolly's desk, who is a senior policy officer within the Combined Authority. He had an initial call with her, and she agreed that she would meet with us. At the same time, my interaction at the meeting, but also they agreed to have a meeting with us. So in April, we met, Anya, Ben and myself met with Jennifer Connolly, who is the Deputy Director of Population Health, and Joe Barham, who's leading on the economic strategy. And we had a really, really good meeting, a really open and honest meeting. And we discussed areas of interests and reasons for wanting to come together and to look for areas of potential opportunities for collaboration. And I just want to say this meeting was taking place just ahead of the local elections in May. Where Tracy was up for re-election. We discussed the new economic strategy that was in development and how we could view food across the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, perhaps as a leaky bucket. Where was the money going out of West Yorkshire in things around procurement, around school meals, around hospital spend, rather than looking at trying to bring in new money, just look to see where it was going. In terms of our next steps, we've since met again, and we're now working on a collective ambition for improving food systems in West Yorkshire as a sort of paper, emphasising the importance of local production and procurement. The aim of this is to identify hooks and areas of interest that we can work in partnership with the West Yorkshire, with the Combined Authority on. Jen Connolly is also looking into using the West Yorkshire Scientific Advisory Group, which is a partnership between the Combined Authority, Yorkshire universities and experts to provide evidence to support economic growth, improve health and reduce inequalities. So to use this as a method for raising the importance of food politically with the Mayor. The Combined Authority is well positioned to convene conversations, and we now need to influence what those conversations might be. We're also well aware that there are other food conversations happening across the local authority, across like West Yorkshire, between local authority departments, particularly public health, looking at the healthy food advertising and free school meals, as well as the West Yorkshire Food Poverty Alliance, speaking directly with Tracy Brabin about taking a regional approach to food security. Others, since we've been having these meetings and these discussions, others have expressed interest in joining in these conversations, but the 5 of us have agreed to keep this small working group and to note that it's not a regional partnership, but 5 people exploring options in the name of driving the regional agenda. We want to stress that the purpose of our conversations is to look for hooks and areas of interest that are not currently being developed to help get food properly on the regional agenda, beyond food banks and rediverting food waste. So really trying to look at the whole food system. And we've got an agreement to meet monthly to every 6 weeks. So in conclusion, I just want to say that this current small working group is also sounding out how a regional partnership might function in the delivery of actions once hooks and areas of interest have been identified. And we're really keen to hear from other areas on what they're pursuing. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Sonia. Really, really interesting, and a really nice place to leave the discussion at, because that's precisely what I want to do next, is to invite others to tell us about their experience in engaging with the Combined Authority or Mayor, or ask any questions to our excellent speakers. So I haven't spotted anything in the chat, but this is really an opportunity for everyone in the call.
Sorry, we do have a question actually from Ian, and we've just had another one come through from Helena. Would we like to go to those first, or to open the floor to share experiences?
Let's go to those first, since you've wrote them in the chat. Do you want to unmute and ask the questions, or I'm happy to read them if you want. So Ian and Helena.
Okay, thank you. No, I basically, there is a movement building around a directly elected mayor for Plymouth. and it's in its very early stages, but I think it is going to develop some momentum. So I've already engaged with that in terms of a public event that was put on. But I'm wondering really how people would advise engaging with it, bearing in mind that disruptor role, because that is going to disrupt things as they currently stand, and we need to be a little bit careful around that. Around how to make sure that food gets an appropriate place, on their agenda from the very outset. I think engaging early has got to be a good thing to do, I imagine, unless someone tells me differently. So any advice and hints and tips on that would be really gratefully received. Thank you.
I will open this one to all our speakers because you have different perspectives, and I'm sure your advice will be very welcome.
I think shall I go first? Just I attended a few hustings actually with Andy Burnham and the other mayoral candidates recently for this latest round of elections. And actually what was interesting was that they went round to areas within Greater Manchester where people with lived experience of poverty told their stories, supported, I would say, by other groups like Debt Justice, etc. And it was so moving and so powerful that I think the media is kind of at the moment, I think cost of living crisis is being watered down a little bit, but actually it's still a huge issue. We've got baby banks growing, food banks still growing in Greater Manchester. We've got 274. And I think that recognition for Andy was key, to the point where even in his acceptance speech, he said one of his, biggest objectives for this next term was to ensure that no resident in Greater Manchester was in fear of debt, hunger and eviction. So that food element is still there. So what I would say is, make sure that any of your candidates, etc., start to speak to people within your communities who are either running, crisis food provision, or people experiencing issues around food. Get them out to your local, growing communities. We had a great presentation at our Food Security Action Network meeting a couple of weeks ago from Solar City with our Green Social Prescribing Fund, and Andy was blown away by the work that they've been doing across Greater Manchester on very small plots of land. So I would say, get them out into the communities, get people talking to them and saying what, it's a huge issue for people. It's a basic need, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Chris, you're unmuted. If you want to add anything, feel free to come in. I
don't have anything hugely valuable, I don't think, but just to say, I am an academic. I'm not working in this field sort of directly, but we did a piece of work last year that tried to focus on how civil society organizations are leveraging food policy change in the UK, and we spoke to 19 organizations, many of whom are connected with Sustain and organizations here, and we released a summary report which is available online. It's open access, that summarizes how these brilliant organizations are trying to leverage change through a combination of sort of big picture thinking, relationship building, and providing sort of detailed evidence at the right time. So I direct you towards that.
Just to follow on, sorry, Chris, from that as well, following Andy's re-election, he's been inundated with invites to speak to the big kind of national food campaigners as well, which again, I think is quite interesting. If people can harness those big organisations, then they have that sort of leverage as well to gain a bit of an audience with whoever your elected mayor might be.
So, Chris, if you can put a link to that research you just mentioned, or send it to me and I can include it with the recording and presentations of this session, that would be very helpful. And we have a question from Eleanor in the chat as well about how best to get in touch with mayors. Helene, I think you've alluded to a few things already. I don't know if that, Helena, that answers your question, or feel free to come in, unmute.
Oh, thank you. And thanks all for the presentations. It's been very insightful. Yeah, I was just wondering if, say, because I know Sonia mentioned that she approached someone after they did a speech at an event, but I just don't know. I was wondering if there's easier ways to get in touch, or if it's more, if it's better to approach someone in person to try and engage with mayors, because we've tried emailing before, and I feel like it's that same way with MPs. It's like quite difficult to get their attention just because they have so many emails and flooded into their inbox. So yeah, just looking for the best way to get in touch and engage them. And I know Elaine just mentioned about making sure that they are speaking to people in the local community, but it's more like that first step of how do you actually build that connection with them and then build that relationship.
Can I just come in with a comment that when I was at this event, I think what caught her attention, the mayor's attention, was that while I introduced myself, I also said that I was speaking with food partnerships across West Yorkshire, so that to show that we'd already been working together, and it wasn't then just sort of like a single person coming. It was sort of like together we've been working on this, and that was quite interesting to her because she felt that she had a wider audience to be working with. I had a positive response because of that.
Really nice tip, Sonia. Ben, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. It's a good question, Eleanor. And I think, my response back is, is it the mayor that you need to get in touch with, or is it officers? And I think that's something that's, I think, an important, thing to differentiate, because, as your title suggests, campaigns and policy assistant on the Vegan Society. If you're looking to get in touch at a regional level regarding these campaigns, there's also the officers that are running these campaigns, and public health have budget around campaigns. And I'm just wondering, is it the mayor that you need to speak to, or is it actually the people that could be running campaigns? Because if public health are running something on healthy eating, actually, if you were to present them with, plant-based diets and the health benefits of a plant-based diet, I suspect there is, some traction to be gained there and some kind of mutual benefit of doing so.
Thumbs up from Helena there. So thank you for all your tips and insight. Feel free to indicate any questions, share your experience, put your hand up using the reaction button, or unmute and speak. Vera, go for your question.
Oh, thank you so much. I didn't want to take co-chair's privileges this early. I had a few questions, but I'll just choose one. And I suppose this is aimed to Elaine and perhaps to a lesser extent to the West Yorkshire folks. So it's really interesting kind of structure and action group, task force infrastructure that you shared, and the way it connects into the mayor and his accountability and also his agendas. But I'm kind of interested, how does this network, the food security network, and the governance structure that you guys are fitting into align alongside, for example, the Sustainable Food Places Network and the food partnerships in Greater Manchester? Do you envision this as contributing to food partnerships and a food partnership network delivering across the broader spectrum of food issues? Or do you see this infrastructure as a way to perhaps host or give space to the food partnerships, which of course would necessitate weaving in some of those wider, the 6 key issues, which I appreciate not everyone here will be familiar with Sustainable Food Places framework of 6 key issues. And you guys do touch on a number of those. But so how do you see those kind of sitting alongside, or do you see one as kind of hosting the other in terms of delivery across food system issues?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. This is something that we are starting to discuss now, mainly because, like I said at the outset, the focus was on food insecurity. I think we also recognise that you're absolutely right. I think we've got 7 out of our 10 local authorities who are part of Sustainable Food Places, but each of the 10 local authorities has their own food strategy. And what we're mindful of is that we can't then, even though people said, why don't you have a GM food strategy? We feel that we might be treading on people's toes, and actually it might be better to kind of develop a set of principles or maybe a framework to ensure that there's an overarching consistent approach for every local authority. But that's something that we're starting to grapple with at the moment. We recognise sort of probably more recently that a lot of these food partnerships in the 10 local authorities are led by our public health directors of public health, and that they're people that we need to start to talk to a lot more, especially as we start to probably move our focus away from that crisis response and start looking at the whole food system. And we feel that the establishment of a food programme board, which we are going to do this year, and the Mayor has said he wants establishing, is some way of starting to move towards that collaborative approach across the city region, which will include then the 10 local authorities in terms of their own objectives, and maybe how we can start to add value at a combined authority level, but also through the Food Security Action Network as well.
Ben, feel free to come in.
Yeah, thanks. Just to add on to that, I think I'd really echo what Elaine said there, but I don't think we need that more strategy. I think what we need from the combined authorities, especially in the case of West Yorkshire and it sounds similar for Manchester, is that convening, pulling us together to work better together, and also to make that funding available and to make, the right enabling, supportive, governance structure in that sense. Another thought that just came to mind when the question was posed actually was around, this is two-way, because for the combined authorities to think about food, it still has to be a local authority priority. So I was speaking with somebody at the combined authority, and it actually made a very good simple reminder that the combined authority is a combination of the authorities in that area. So when you're talking about gain share, for food to be included in the gain share funding, it needs to be a priority at the local authority level. So there's still that bit of the governance is two ways there. So whilst the combined authority does need to kind of play that role convening, there's still the roles of the partnerships to make sure that food is a proper priority at the local level, beyond just strategies, but actual in the way that these organisations operate. Thanks. Just wanted to add that in, Sophia.
Thank you, Ben. That's really helpful. Anya, do you want to come in? We have two more questions in the chat.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut across. You go on,
Go
Sophia.
for it.
Okay, sorry, just a quickie, and it's on that also, Elaine. It's a direct question to you, really. Obviously, you've got a very big combined authority. You have 10 different sort of local authorities within that, and I think that is a challenge, and it's something we're looking to now that once we have identified the hooks and something that we can start to move forward with. The key thing is kind of strategically, how do we do that in terms of the engagement and in terms of kind of, working together? How do we form a kind of an effective partnership? So my question to you really is, how often do your 10, and is there the same level of involvement from all of your 10 local authorities? Or do you find that there's one or two who are more proactive? And how often do you get together as a group, and how do you kind of structure that? Sorry, the question.
No, it's fine. So the actual Food Security Action Network meets on a quarterly basis, mainly in person. We try and encourage that, although we have started to do alternate online as well. I think the task force groups, it is open to any Food Security Action Network members. So you'll find sometimes that maybe some are on 2 or 3 of the task force groups because they feel they can add value, some focus on one, and we have some really good, some of the groups are 40 to 50 strong in terms of people, and they kind of do the work behind the scenes and then report back to the Food Security Action Network, sort of bigger meetings in terms of progress. So that's kind of how that works. In terms of representation, I would say we do have representation across all 10, but I would say probably Manchester, we have more representation just because it's the biggest local authority. I've noticed, I think someone is on from our the food partnership from Manchester City Council on this call. And again, I would say that, just because of the probably some of the scale of the issue in Manchester, that's why, that they're sort of probably more predominant. You have a lot of the sort of bigger support sort of organisations as well. So a lot of our GM food manufacturers are located actually in Manchester, Trafford, who we get a lot of support from, like your Kellogg's, people like that. So I would say, yeah, we do meet on a regular basis. And if I just mention as well, for the task force groups, we're mindful that there is no funding available for this at all, and it's based on goodwill. And we tend to have 3 co-chairs for each of the task force groups so that it's not reliant on one person, and they sort of share the responsibilities between them. And that works really well. And we also have an impartial chair for the whole of Food Security Action Network as well. So we have, he's called Reverend Dean Rutherford. I say he's omnipresent. He's across quite a lot of things in Greater Manchester, such as the Faith Panel, but he's seen as very impartial in terms of chairing that group as well. So it's not, you know, the combined authority led at all. You know, it is something that's led by the network members themselves. And I think that's probably been the key to it. It's about that power sharing, and it's not something that's been led by us at all.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Really interesting. Thank you, Elaine. I would like to wrap this up, but there are 2 very good questions in the chat that I would like us to address. So if you can stay for another minute, we'll wrap up in like 2 minutes. There was one question about allocation of funding and how that decision is made internally. I think this is more for Elaine. And then we have a question from Letizia about, do mayors meet? Is there a forum? There's so much wealth of experience and, you know, all the governance that Helene just covered in Greater Manchester. It would be great for other mayors to share what they're doing and to learn from each other. So maybe this one is for Chris. So, but I open the floor to anyone who would like to address any of these 2 questions.
So I think in terms of the mayor's meeting, there are forums organised through the LGA. I think there are interesting regional bodies that are emerging as well. So I'm a big fan of the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, for example, which brings together local and mayoral combined authorities from the Yorkshire and Humber region. So I think there are these emerging regional bodies that are regions of regions and which take different forms in different places, but I think are probably an intermediate level between that national level organisation and this emerging mayoral combined authority that I think we need to engage with more. And food systems obviously play a really big part in those conversations. So if you haven't been aware of it, please have a look at the website for the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, because I think it's an interesting model for how a region of regions might look.
I think just to add as well, I would say Andy has a very close relationship with Steve Rotherham in Liverpool and Tracy Grabin as well, just kind of that northern kind of connection. And we have been contacted by Liverpool City Region to say, how did you set up your Food Security Action Network? And I think it's not to discount sometimes, you know, I don't know if anyone's seen Andy DJing against Steve Rotherham and things like that, just those kind of relationships in general, you know, they do talk just in general. So, you know, and they just pick up things from one another, and I think they emulate one another as well. And you know, they always want to be the first city region to do this, but then you see them all following suit in terms of, you know, devolution of transport, etc. So you know, there are formal meetings, but it's not to discount the sort of informal discussions that go on between them as well, and how you can influence that, I would say. And just in terms of funding, we don't have anything in at the moment in terms of funding, apart from he's so committed to this emergency food card that the mayor's committed this £50,000. But I think all we do at the moment is promote any funding opportunities for local organisations with national funds, local funds, etc. But that's something that we're really struggling with, if I'm honest, at the moment, because you don't know how long you can sustain something like this on goodwill alone.
Thank you so much to everyone. To wrap up, I would really like to thank all our speakers for their excellent presentations. Thank you so much. You've been so insightful. And I would like to hear your final thoughts. And actually, there's a really interesting provocation here from Nikki Dravers in the chat. Is there any scope at all for combined authorities to fund food partnership coordinators regionally? So 30 seconds to each of our speakers to give us any final tips, final thoughts, or answer this question provocation from Nikki. I'm going to use the order you came through as speakers. So Chris, do you want to go first?
So I think it's absolutely essential. In South Yorkshire, for example, the South Yorkshire Combined Mayoral Authority has committed to a regional food strategy, and there's not really a plan in place for how that's going to be delivered. I don't see how it can be done without a food partnership at that regional level. But the question comes for how it's going to be institutionalized, how it's going to be funded, and how it's going to be led. So there's a commitment there, but the mechanics, I think, don't really exist. I'm not sure how typical that is across the country, but I would absolutely love to see more regional food partnerships. And I was been really encouraged by the sort of emerging counties group within the Sustainable Food Places Network.
Thank you. Elaine?
It's something that we've asked for, not got it yet. So we'll keep asking, but we think there's going to be funding for a GM Networks Connect coordinator now. So maybe they, might be able to support this particular action network a little bit more. But yeah, nothing so far.
Thank you.
It would definitely be an ask from us. I just, because when I look at Leeds, like the food system doesn't stop there, like it goes so much wider. And if the food partnerships regionally could be supported, we could just do so much. We could have much greater impact. So that is definitely an ask.
Ben, if you're still, you're still there.
Yeah, still here. Yeah, I absolutely think there is. Again, it's kind of what Chris was talking to. I think it's where it would sit. And I think it's important that it's not just seen as a public health initiative, as it is typically in local authorities. I think that will be the challenge, and I think the closer to the mayor's office the role could sit, I think the better.
Anya? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, of course, fully in agreement that it's needed. I think that's what we're working towards. I think that the key challenge that we have at the moment is that, Manchester, thank goodness at the moment, that combined authority is the exception to many, but food still remains kind of almost implicit and hidden among other strategies and priorities. And it is about making food front and centre and recognising that we need actually to be putting, both finance and resource behind actually the food change, and that actually it's instrumental in making other changes rather than being a follow-on or implicit, as I think it is too often.
Thank you all. This is really inspiring, and it gives me hope, and I feel excited for the window of opportunities before the dust settles, really. Thank you so much to our speakers and for everyone that stayed over time. I think the discussion was so rich that I hope you didn't miss anything important in these extra minutes. Before you go, please fill in our evaluation survey. It's very useful for us to know how we've done, but also how we can improve future events. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you at the next one.